I read a report about you yesterday, and I found that you got yourself a Chinese name,
Yes, of course.
上贤, which means respect for the virtuous and the talented. So how did you come up with this name in the first place? I mean, it sounds quite confusion.
In this case, it was suggested to my wife, who ended up choosing. And it was suggested by a couple of Chinese university professors. My wife has a Chinese studies behind her.
China and Switzerland have a long history of friendly exchanges at all levels. What are some of the highlights this year with regard to cultural exchange activities between the two countries?
You've said it very well. We have a very long history of very dense relations. And in that sense, I could just wiggle my way out of the question by telling you, well, more of the same. Because we have an extensive cultural program in all fields. We have orchestras and musicians coming to China. We have collaborations in the field of cinema, movie making. We have visual artists who came and are coming to China. We do that on a very regular basis.
So how is Chinese culture received in Switzerland?
I think it has long been received with great interest and curiosity. Whenever there is a Chinese exhibition or a Chinese concert, like every end of the year there's a famous Chinese concert, people come and admire and like very much, so there's curiosity. Is it that the Swiss know China that well? No, I wouldn't say so. But every time there is something, it attracts the masses. Naturally, one of the very first exhibitions, if not the first in Europe actually, of the terracotta warriors a generation ago happened in Zurich. That attracted a lot of people, and a couple of years ago there was another one, and it set a new record.
You have been living and working here in China for over 4 years. Which part of Chinese culture appeals to you the most?
Well, what appeals to me the most is what usually appeals to me the most. It's visual arts. I specialize in visual arts. I collect paintings, and so definitely that is something that I will instinctively go and see. My démarche, however, has been as follows. I'm very interested in what I don't know. And there are many aspects of Chinese culture that I cannot grasp, like calligraphy, because I don't speak Chinese, and so I'm not in tune with what I see. But even there, I took a liking for different forms of calligraphy, especially ancient forms.
Mm-hmm. I heard that you're a big collector of Chinese artworks. So what sort of things do you usually go for? Like,
My parents already collected Chinese art. They lived in Hong Kong a long time ago, and so I took a liking for that porcelain and Compagnie des Indes, which is export porcelain, and some other forms of Chinese art. But there, the collector in me and the lover of contemporary paintings or contemporary art has gone into that also, yes.
Mm-hmm. Last year was the Sino-Swiss tourism year, and China has become the fourth largest source of overseas visitors for Switzerland. So how do you evaluate the role tourism plays in enhancing people-to-people exchanges?
I think it's central. I think it's a pillar of the nation-to-nation build-up of ties, understanding, commonalities, and hence then cooperation, collaboration. It always boils down to people. So we're very happy that a lot of Chinese tourists come to Switzerland every year. You've said it right, yes, we have over 1.2 million Chinese tourists coming to Switzerland every year. I hope that more and more Swiss will come to China too, and that really helps develop a common understanding. Now, all over the world, and there's almost no exception, people have prejudiced views because they don't know everything. Mm-hmm. We all have prejudiced views, positive or negative. And being a tourist, that is, visiting a new country, usually has an effect on you in as much as you widen, you broaden your scope and your understanding of people, and you usually end up understanding, well, they're people like me, with differences, of course, but still. And so that softens the attitude. And a lot of negative attitudes are also, unbeknownst to people, based on a form of fear of the unknown, fear of what you've heard, fear of the negatives that you've heard. And when you come and actually feel around, those fears tend to disappear, and then a better understanding comes in.
Mm-hmm. Just like what you said, that we will end up discovering that we have more in common, more commonalities than differences. Mm-hmm. And any other programs in place to attract more Chinese visitors to Switzerland? I know that a highlight of Swiss tourism is its winter tourism around the Alps.
Now there is a particular focus on winter tourism, just because winter tourism is getting big in China because of the Olympics, the Winter Olympics that are scheduled for 2022. There's a build-up in China itself, and so there's a build-up of interest on the part of Chinese tourists. And we know that we have a lot to offer in that field. And so yes, we are developing new offers. There are more and more Chinese ski instructors working in our Alps. We're bringing in also expertise to help develop the winter tourism industry or the winter sports industry in China. And so we sense that there's a mutual interest. Switzerland was the first European country to open a permanent tourism office in China over 20 years ago. And ever since, we've been attaching great importance to China.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of prejudiced views, just like what you mentioned before, that when we talk about Switzerland, the first thing we can think of is cheese fondue or Swiss watches, but I'm sure Swiss culture is more than that. So what are some of the best ways to overcome cultural stereotypes when we try to understand another culture?
I understand the question, and there's no magic formula for that. I'd say it starts with thinking about yourself and about your own culture, and thinking about the image that is projected by your own culture abroad. Then you start realizing, the image that we project may not be all-encompassing, it may not be broad enough. And that obviously proves that what I know and what I see from other cultures is obviously very limited. So I should go beyond. And you said cheese and watches. Yes, that's also a defining characteristic of Switzerland, definitely. But indeed, anybody who gives it a thought will understand that a country cannot be subsumed by just a couple.
Mm-hmm. You have lived and worked in many different countries. And from your observation, are there any commonalities between Chinese and Swiss culture?
As I told you, in the end effect, we're all human and we have the same approach to life. So even though our past culture is very different, and the mental processes whereby man solves its own problems may have been different, we come to a set of results which in some cases may be quite similar. Of course, Chinese paintings and Swiss paintings are not the same, but the approach to nature, you can find commonalities there. In both countries, paper cutting is a particular national art form. We also have paper cutting in Switzerland, which owes nothing to Chinese influence, just as your paper cutting owes nothing to Swiss influence, but they both exist. So there too, you could say that spontaneously, different groups of people come up with art forms and solutions to problems and solutions to the way to express feelings that may be similar.